Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Trish Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful humans. I'm recording this episode with my 3-week-old baby in my arms. He has just fallen to sleep. Hopefully he'll stay asleep for the whole episode. If you do hear any little noises in the background, that's probably why. But today on the podcast, I am talking to Kate Patchett, who is a private midwife. In fact, she's not your typical midwife. She is a woman on a mission to create a world in which every woman knows how to embrace her innate strength, confidently claim her dream pregnancy and birth, and step into motherhood with a profound sense of empowerment and oxytocin-fueled joy. As well as a registered private midwife, Kate has a number of qualifications, including childbirth educator and sleep consultant. She is the founder of Grow.Birth.Mother, who provides services including childbirth education, continuity of care as private midwives, home birth care, or really just private midwifery care in any model of birth and pregnancy, birth and postpartum that you choose to have. And she also has some coaching programs and does some other things within the Grow.Birth.Mother clinic. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. We chat all about, really, we dive into like what a midwife actually does, because I think there can be a lot of confusion around that. And I know for myself, and I talk about in my first pregnancy, I really had no idea that there was this option of having a private midwife and having continuity of care, And so we talk about what continuity of care is and how it can be really beneficial for women and couples in pregnancy, labor, birth, and postpartum. We talk about the cascade of interventions when it comes to birth, and we talk about home birth. We talk about a really, really important one of women stepping into their power so that they can birth with confidence. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Kate, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation and sharing with everyone today. I really wanted to start with you telling us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Kate. I'm a mum of 3. I'm a wife and I'm a private midwife here in Melbourne. I'm very passionate about midwifery and I can get very fired up at times. I've been a midwife for over 15 years and I've been out in the private sector of private midwifery since towards the middle to end of 2021. Left the system then and have not looked back and won't be going back.
And what was it it's probably a big question, but what was it that led you to going into private practice?
I actually did. So you have to do further study to become a private midwife and to become endorsed through Medicare. So I actually did that back in 2017 when I had my first baby, 2016, I should say. But then just, life happened and things got sidetracked and had another baby. And then it was actually just pre-COVID. And I was in the system. I worked casually because even though it's a woman-dominated field, it is really not catered for mums. And felt that I could really only work casually. And I've always wanted, like being a midwife, when I first started, it was about the babies. But then when you become a midwife, it's, like the babies are just the cherry on top. It's really the women and the relationship with the women. And I really just love working with women, and especially in this field. But working in the system, I never left work satisfied. I always left, you would go into a shift and you would have like exceptional documentation. But with that, I would then have really poor patient care, or I would have exceptional patient care, but my documentation was really bad. And unfortunately, the thing that they would get me on or would pull me up on or anything was always my documentation. It was never about the patient care, which for me, that's the priority. You know, the patient care and being with women is what I love. And
Yeah.
and also I'm a no person, I'm not a yes person, and I literally couldn't bite my tongue anymore. And unfortunately, towards the end of my work in the system, I saw a lot of trauma. I saw a lot of abuse. I had to go and get my own counseling to deal with that, with what I witnessed. And I just couldn't be a part of that anymore.
Mm.
And I had filtering out to go private, but didn't really know how that was going to look. So at the time, then by this stage, it was COVID, and they were allowing you to access your super. There was very little casual work for midwives at the time. So I would go weeks without working, just no work available. And really at this crossroads of where do I go to from here? I really can't be in the system. I really want to work with women, but I don't know how that's going to look. And I decided to access my super, and I took out $10,000, and I used that to invest in a whole range of self-education, and thought, I'm just going to invest and I'm going to see where I land. And this is where I landed. So this is where it took me.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's so much to unpack there when it comes to for any woman out there, I guess, listening, to understand different models of care when it comes to your pregnancy, your labor and birth, and postpartum. And so what I really wanted to, I guess, have a conversation with you today was to really talk about what you do as a midwife and as a private midwife, and what that kind of model of care looks like, regardless of, I guess, women's choices of where they want to birth or anything like that, because there's so much involved. And the reason why I really wanted to have this conversation is because, for anyone listening, I have just had my second baby. Both of my pregnancies, birth, postpartum, I had a private midwife and was under private midwifery care. I won't go into like my stories, I've shared them, but just really briefly, like my first pregnancy, I chose to have a hospital birth, but under private midwifery care. Ended up being an unplanned near home birth with a hospital transfer. It was all the experience. And then my second baby, we decided to have a home birth. Again, unfortunately needing a hospital transfer, but both had, we had private midwifery care for both of those. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, because I know how much of an impact and a positive impact that had on my pregnancies and my birth and postpartum experiences. But going back to my first pregnancy, I'd spent so much time, doing preconception prep. So my husband and I were doing all the nutrition and all the lifestyle things, preparing ourselves to fall pregnant. And I never really thought about what would happen once I fell pregnant. And I didn't, when I fell pregnant, because I fell pregnant quite quickly, I had no idea that there was different options, different models of care. Everyone around me had just gone into the system and had, your standard hospital births. And I had absolutely no idea. And it just happened to be that I went to a gym that was down the road, like a couple of doors down from a private midwife clinic. And I just happened to look at the sign one day early in my first pregnancy and went, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that is. And that's how I came across private midwifery care. And so I wanted to have this conversation because I thought there's probably so many women out there who are either maybe exploring different options for their pregnancy, or maybe just have no idea that there are other options and what that could mean for them.
Most women don't know private midwifery exists or what it entails.
Exactly. So let's start there. Let me know, to share with us, what does a private midwife do, and what does that model of care look like?
So what a private midwife does, I would have to say, is quite endless. It really is a case by case or client by client scenario. But basically, I'll just break it down. So a midwife is a health professional who cares for people throughout their conception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum stage of a woman's journey. And the term midwife actually means with woman. It really is about building that relationship with the woman who's going through that journey of, conceiving and growing and birthing and mothering her baby. And for me, as private midwifery, like I said, when I first entered midwifery, it was about the babies. The babies are cute and delicious and yeah, really are a cherry on top, but it really is about the woman. And for me, it really is about that relationship. Just by having a known care provider, which is continuity of care. So having a midwife throughout your whole pregnancy, the same midwife, the outcomes are just like astronomical. Like you can't even, like, I know the research shows it time and time again. But I guess what I wanted to talk about today too is really to show some examples of what that continuity of care looks like.
Yeah, please do.
So for example, I had one client, she was booked in for a home birth with me. We had seen each other, I had done her care pretty much from very early in pregnancy. So we got to know each other quite well. It wasn't until almost at the end of her pregnancy and we met together and we kind of just stumbled into this conversation where a whole lot of trauma came up for her and she was comfortable to share that trauma. And she was basically in a codependent relationship and was afraid to leave the house.
Goodness.
And about a week, 10 days later, she went into labor and she had the most amazing home birth. And talking to her afterwards, she was just like, I just had to look at you and I knew that you had faith and trust in me that I could do this and that I was strong enough. And even now we talk on a regular basis. Her baby is, I don't know, 8 months or something by now. And she actually sends me photos of her out with her baby at the coffee shop by herself. Like, and I'm not saying like it's not me, it's that relationship. It's that space being held for people to be able to open up. And if she was in the system, and this is not like a system thing, but in the system, you don't get the time with midwives.
Yeah.
You don't get that continuity of care. Like that trauma would not have, it would have surfaced in her pregnancy, but she more than likely wouldn't have felt safe to bring it up and talk about it and open up and have that trusting relationship or have the time. That appointment went for nearly 2 hours. We just sat and we talked about, okay, how's this going to look when you have a baby with you? How are you going to venture out of the house and how are you, so yeah, that was kind of just, one example.
And what an incredible, like, transformative, life-changing experience that was for her then. Like, it's just beautiful. And it really, you're right, like it would have all come about because you were able to hold space for her and have that relationship and that connection and that trust. It's just, that's a really,
and
really
I think that
powerful
also
story.
really enhances the birth journey as well, that we'd had that conversation prior, that she felt safe to do that. So then you feel safe to, be vulnerable and birth in front of these midwives, And look, I want to say private midwifery is, I think one of the things with private midwifery is that a lot of people believe it's just for home birth, people who are choosing to have a home birth, which is totally not true. That's actually one of my biggest missions as a private midwife. So currently I do support home births, but as of 2025, I am taking a break. I've been on call for 3 years and I'm ready to, myself and my kids are ready for me to have a break off being off call. But moving into next year, my mission is to really provide affordable and accessible care to all women, continuity of care, I should say, to all women, no matter where they're birthing. So currently, I support women who are free birthing. I support women who are in rural Victoria, who I've never met in my life face-to-face, but we collaborate over telehealth. And, and a lot of that work is advocacy, support, coaching, education. I've got women who support birth in the private system. I've got women who birth in the public system. And private midwifery can support any woman, no matter where she lives, where she's birthing. That support is there and that continuity of care is available.
Yeah, I love that. And I really wish that continuity of care was something that was offered to everyone. But so beautiful that we can go out and find women like yourself that are providing that service. Because I know even for me, like my first birth, like I said, we hadn't planned a home birth, but we still had that private midwife and that continuity of care. And that made such a difference. I had someone that I could go to and talk to them about all the things that were coming up in my pregnancy. Even, being the first time that I was pregnant, there's so much stuff that comes up and so much that you don't know, and having someone that you can trust to have that conversation with is so nice. I just knew as soon as I came across it that I was like, this is what I want, because I don't want to go to a different midwife or a different nurse or doctor in hospital every time I have an appointment and talk to someone different and hear, different things. I wanted to have someone
Yeah.
that I could
Yeah.
just really build that relationship with. And for
Or when things
me,
come, oh, sorry, go.
go for it. No, please, you go for
I was just going to say,
it.
when things come up, you then have to wait to your next scheduled appointment.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
in that meantime, you either calling the hospital, but one, it takes you forever to even get someone to answer your phone call. And then you get like generally it's admin staff who's answering the phone. And you're kind of getting someone different each time. Or you're going to Dr. Google, which Dr. Google provides responses in a really broad whole population response,
Yep.
And look, I say that in full awareness that I Dr. Google as well, like we all do it. And never once have I walked away feeling better from Dr. Google. It never seems to work. And this is what I say to my clients now. If you pick your phone up to go put something in Google, move away from Google, go onto WhatsApp and send me a message, and I'll give you a personalized response.
Yeah, nice.
Like, and quite often we use WhatsApp where we can like audio message each other, and we talk, and like it's even just something as simple as, can I wax down there? Can I go and have my hair dyed? Baby's moving like this. Is this normal? I've got this discharge,
Yeah.
I've got hemorrhoids. What do I do? I've got hemorrhoids. Is this,
Yeah.
so instead of having to wait to get to that appointment where then I had a client recently and she said, I waited 2 hours for an appointment. I had a list of questions. I was there for 7 minutes and I walked out and not one question was answered.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think, yeah. And I think the other thing for me that was something that was important to me was having someone that I could discuss, some of the tests and the routine procedures and things that are done both in pregnancy and in like labor and birth, and having someone that you could have a conversation about that with, that we're able to present you the research and the evidence and allow you to make an informed decision for yourself. And that was really, or at least collaborate on an informed decision. That was really important to me. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well, and how that looks with yourself and your clients?
Yeah. So I have I have a huge resource folder that I send. I have things already like labeled out. Here's everything for gestational diabetes. Here's everything for GBS. And for me, when I always present these things, the first thing I always say, the first option is no. Like, no is an option. If you don't want to be screened for diabetes, you don't have to be screened for diabetes. If you don't want to have a GBS swab, you don't have to have a GBS swab. Like that's always an option. So, and like with that, with my like appointments and clients, like we have the time to go through that. Like we have the time to and quite often it's like, okay, this is what's coming up next appointment. So here's the resources, go and read it, jot your questions down, and then when we come back, we'll go through it, and we'll see what comes up and we can discuss options. And so I think just also too, like quite often like you get a leaflet or you get something like and it's very biased. Quite often the leaflets are very biased. So yeah, and it's a bit like, these are the really reputable resources. These are the places to go. Go and do your own research. I can tell you where to get the research from, but you need to go and do it, and you need to work out what feels comfortable for you. And then when you come back, we'll talk about what feels comfortable and how you would like to navigate your care.
Yeah. And did you find when you were in the system that that approach was really different? Like, because I know for some, like I've had a couple of experiences where I've gone in for different routine tests, or, you know, for example, the last pregnancy I had a low-lying placenta that was found at the 20-week scan that I decided to have. And so we decided to have another check late in pregnancy to make sure my placenta had moved enough because I was having home birth. So we just wanted to make sure it was in a, you know, an okay position. And when I went back in for that scan, my midwife had written on the scan, this is placenta only check. When I called and booked up, I'd said this is just checking the placenta. And I went in, and the sonographer, she said, oh, I have to first check the baby and the baby's measurements. And I said, oh no, I don't want to have that. I'm just checking that my placenta's in an okay position. And she said, no, I have to. And I said, no, you actually don't.
No.
I'm just having a placenta check. I've decided not to have, I don't want to have the baby's measurements done. And so I just find it really interesting, because often, I know for a lot of my friends and often conversations that I've had with women, the language that's been used has been made them to feel like they have to do certain things. Whereas I think that's something that I found with private midwife care, is we can have these conversations so that we feel more informed about the choices that we want to make.
Yeah. A client I have who's doing shared care, she came to me, she's like, oh, so I had the appointment with the hospital, and she said, oh, and they've booked me in for the blood test. I'm like, what do you mean booked you in? And she's like, oh yeah, they gave me an appointment date for the blood test. I'm like, yeah, what blood test? She's like, oh, I think it's the diabetes. I'm like, did they present any other options? She's like, no, they just told me they booked me in. I'm like,
that's not informed choice. That's not informed. Where's the
they can't
information?
just be like, okay, this is the schedule, you booked in, go there on this date and do this blood test. You know, and then at that appointment we spoke about what the options are. You know, well, for starters, do you want to be screened for diabetes? Do you know what gestational diabetes is? Do you, you know, do you know the risk factors, and you know what it means if you have the label of a GDM woman, you know, and what that brings about, you know, because that, you know, I find one of the really interesting things about pregnancy care, or when we're talking about birth, is I actually had a client, and she was from Sydney, and she was going private with their private obstetrician, and we were in discussions because her private obstetrician told her that her baby was big. And for the listeners, I'm doing quotation marks here. The baby was big.
Yes.
And that if she could have a normal vaginal birth, but she would tear. She would tear with this big baby. So to counteract that, you can have an elective cesarean.
Oh.
I was like, okay. And I said, okay, so I said, when we're talking elective cesarean, say you go, okay, yep, I could tear, you know, I've got this supposedly big baby and I could tear, let's book in an elective cesarean. I said, you are 100% going to have a cut to your uterus. Like 100%. You consent to an elective cesarean, 100% that's what's happening. You're having a cut to your uterus.
And through I said, 7 layers of tissue.
7 layers of tissue. And I said, or you may tear. And I said, did your obstetrician talk to you about how to reduce the chance of tearing? No. So the options were, you can have a normal birth and you can tear, you will tear. And basically your vagina will never be the same ever again. Or you can have an elective cesarean and your uterus will never be the same again. Like, but it's presented as in, you can have an elective cesarean because then you won't tear. Yeah, but then that means your uterus is going to have a cut and a wound to it. And have they spoken to you about what happens to a baby when they've had no labor and you have an elective cesarean? Is that discussion being had? No. Okay, so do you know that's the most risky thing to a baby? Not having a heads up that they're coming out. And, you know, I'm not anti-elective cesarean. It totally needs to be there.
Yeah.
But that conversation needs to be there.
Yeah, for
This
sure.
is what
And
happens with an elective cesarean. You know, your baby's got no heads up that they're coming out, and they're
yeah.
more likely going to need resuscitation because they haven't had the hormone stimuli to initiate their body to start preparing to come out and doing everything on their own.
And this is the thing. So this is what I'm really passionate about: informed care and informed choice when it comes to all types of women's healthcare. And I think, honestly, women's healthcare needs a makeover in all forms, not just in pregnancy. But this is it's the same conversation that we're having in all types of women's healthcare, where I feel like informed choice and informed decision making isn't happening. And it's just, this is what's done because it's always been done, or because it's been done for a certain amount of time. This is how it's done, and it's just given to you or handed to you as this is what you should do, rather than, like you've said, here is the options, here is the possibilities, here is the risks and benefits of each of those choices, for us to then make a decision. And also just on the tearing, I just had a 2nd-degree tear. It heals pretty quickly.
I know, it's like tearing's a bad thing now. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with tearing. But also too, there's no conversation about how to reduce tearing.
You
know? And don't even get me started on dates and raspberry leaf tea, because that just annoys me as well.
On due dates?
No, on eating dates.
Eating dates.
Having raspberry leaf tea and doing all this, perineal massage. I'm not, there's all this talk to do these things, but there's no talk on how to reduce tearing, which means not having an induction, not having an epidural, freedom of movement, no coach pushing. Like, you can eat as many dates and have as much raspberry leaf tea as you want. If you've got the other things happening, it's just
And I think that's a really interesting conversation, is because when it comes to these, routine tests and things that are done in pregnancy and birth, it really is about understanding like what that cascade of intervention could end up being. Because if you, like you said, if you have the test for gestational diabetes, and that, like, what does that then mean? If that's positive, what does that mean? How does that impact the next choices? How does that impact, potentially another cascade of interventions that could happen in pregnancy? Do you want to talk more about that, like the cascade of interventions, for anyone who may be new to hearing that term?
So cascade of interventions is about, basically you're at the top of a mountain, and once that ball starts rolling, it's going to keep on rolling, and it's going to keep getting bigger, and we're going to keep having intervention after intervention after intervention. In example, with the label of a GDM woman, you're then going to have more frequent monitoring. You're going to have induction talks. You're going to be pressurized for induction. You're going to be lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
So generally with GDM, even if a lot of the research shows that in Australia we have the lowest levels for what diagnoses a woman as GDM. In the UK they're higher. They're not massively higher, but substantially. There would be quite a number of women in Australia who are diagnosed GDM, but if they were living in the UK, they would not be diagnosed as GDM. A lot of the research shows that we're actually doing a lot of treatment for GDM that's unnecessary. And a woman who has gestational diabetes and it's controlled by diet is actually of no increased risk compared to a woman who is low risk pregnancy and doesn't have the label of GDM. But unfortunately, these women who then have GDM are then generally booked in for an induction, generally at 38, 39 weeks, more monitoring, so more about growth of baby, more blood tests post-birth, especially for the baby as well, more pressure to feed your baby post-birth, instead of having that, just letting baby dictate what they want when they want. And then generally with that, when you start, then you layer the next cascade of intervention, induction. Then when you add on the layer of induction, you're then more likely to have pain relief. You're more likely to use an episiotomy, which then increases your increased chance of tearing, increased chance of having a forceps, increased chance of having a vacuum. People like to tell you that it doesn't increase the risk of cesarean, but it does increase the risk of cesarean 100% if you're inducing, having pain relief. Doing anything that's unphysiological, you are increasing your chance of having a cesarean.
Yeah.
So and these discussions need to be had at 25 weeks when you're talking about testing for gestational diabetes.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important point to know. And I think, so many women that I've spoken to, like friends of mine, and even for myself, like there's been decisions that I've had in my pregnancies and births that have led to further interventions that, I look back on and think, I wonder if I made a different decision then. I mean, hindsight's a beautiful thing, but it's always, it's really, I think the more information that you can have, the more, education is, what am I trying to say? Knowledge is power is what I'm trying to say. Knowledge is power. And when you feel really informed and understand the risks and benefits of different, interventions or different routine tests and things like that, then it's a lot easier to make a decision that you feel comfortable with. And I would say from experience, having a private midwife that you feel comfortable having those conversations with makes all the difference as well. Because if you're sitting with someone that you don't know and you don't trust, or, you've got a different care provider every time you go in for an appointment, it's really hard to have those conversations.
Yeah. And generally with, like I said, I'm not anti-system, I'm not anti the hospital, but they are working within a system. There is time restrictions, there's a whole amount of things that happen within the system that I don't have to face as a private midwife. Like I can sit and be with a client for 2 hours. I can have updated phone calls with a client. Like, they can call me every second day if they want to, if things are presenting, and it doesn't necessarily have to be any medical thing. There's so many layers that come up in pregnancy. It's relationship changes, it's mother wound, it's, matrescence can present in pregnancy. There's so many things that are not just actually, yes, you're pregnant, but pregnancy brings these other things up. There's trauma in the tissues. A lot of inner child wounds come up, like when we're growing an inner child in our inner child, it brings a lot of stuff up. So I don't have the time restriction or things like that the system has, so we can be on the phone for an hour and talk about something that's coming up for you when it's coming up for you, and I think I sidetracked. I forgot what were we saying before that?
No, I do you know what? I'm
the point of what I was going to say.
I'm just enjoying what you're saying, so I've kind of gotten sidetracked from where we were at in the beginning of that as well. But you're really right. Like pregnancy and birth is such a it's such a huge transformative time of our lives and portal of transformation that happens during that time, and so much does come up. And from my understanding, I feel like when you have appointments in the system, those kind of conversations don't happen that they would with a private midwife. It's a completely different model of care, and one that I would say from experience feels more patient-centered. You mentioned something actually at the start of the podcast, and it was something that I've experienced, where you spoke about the difference in when you were in the system and there being, I think you were talking about documentation, and in hospitals and things, you're required to do a lot of documentation. And my understanding is that has a lot to do with insurance policies and hospital policies and things.
And legal,
Yeah. And I would say from my experience, when I have ended up needing a transfer to hospital, it 100% felt like it was just about ticking boxes and checking things off and doing, like I had a hospital transfer, and the amount of time that was taken just to fill out forms and to tick boxes of things that they required or, were wanting to do. It was really just all about this paperwork, rather than, I just felt like I was totally forgotten about when I was in hospital. And it can be really tricky to navigate, particularly when you're in labor. Like when I had the hospital transfer and I was in labor, there was a couple of routine things that they wanted to do that I had said no to. I was told that that the obstetrician wouldn't come in and they were going to deny me care unless I did what they told me to do. And I flat out said, well, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. And my husband was like, oh, I don't think you can do that. Don't think you can deny care.
I'm a tax-paying citizen.
Yeah.
And I have Medicare and I'm entitled to healthcare whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah. And I was just really lucky and really blessed that I had my private midwife there who was very supporting of me and was able to support through that scenario as well. So I think
it's
regardless,
really, I had something similar where the doctor was like, unless she has a cannula in this, I'm not coming in to see her. I'm like, so you're not even going to come and have that discussion with her? You're not even going to come and do informed consent and explain to her why you want a cannula or what the recommendation is? Like, you're not going to talk to her until she does what you want. Like, I'm like, that's not care, you know? And then she was like, yeah. Like, just like, you're withholding care. I'm like, okay, so I'll document that then. I'll document in my notes that you're withholding care because she doesn't want to do what you're asking her to do.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I said no to a CTG monitor. I said, no, you can use a Doppler instead. And the poor midwife that was in the hospital, I really felt for her because obviously, it's, you know, it wasn't her. She was just going back and forth between, because the obstetrician said the same thing. She said they won't come in and provide care for you unless you do this. And my husband was like, no, you can tell them to come in and have that conversation with us then.
Yeah.
And I will say, after we did say no to the first one, they were very, very good with making sure everything was informed and we want to do this. Is this okay? After that, I think they realized that I was willing to push back on things that I wasn't comfortable with having done.
Yeah.
But,
and people just want to have the conversation.
Yes.
People, you know, people don't want to fight. They just want to have the conversation and be like, you know, I'm happy for my baby to be monitored, but this is how I would like my baby to be monitored. You know? Like, women just want conversations and they want to know the why.
Yes.
The amount of times the why is not provided, you know? And it's this scenario that I had recently where the doctor wouldn't come in unless she had a cannula, and you know, anyway, we kind of got to this point where we did need interventions, and we did, you know, we had tried everything bar cartwheels to get this baby to come out, you know. And I went in and I asked the woman and I said, can I ask you what's coming up for you? And I'm saying, I'm not telling you, I just want to know what's coming up for you. This, for me asking this question, I'm not asking as in like, why are you not doing it? I just want to know what's coming up for you in regards to this recommendation, you know? And I said, what's coming up for you when they recommend to have an ARM, which is breaking of her waters? And she said, well, I don't want to have a postpartum hemorrhage. And I said, why do you think you're going to have a postpartum hemorrhage? And she said, because the doctor told me that if I have an ARM, I will pretty much postpartum hemorrhage. I'm like, no, not true. not true. Anyway, it was just a lack of communication, a bit of twist of words. And I believe she was told that she would have 50% chance of having a postpartum hemorrhage if she had an ARM, which I was like, no, like postpartum hemorrhage and ARM just don't even go together, you know? But yeah, it was just, you know, like not having those full, proper, in detailed conversations. And when you have those conversations, then being, okay, what questions do you have? Like, what have we not covered? What questions do you have from that we need to go through further? Like, is everything making sense? You know? And I say to my clients now, like, if you get home, because quite often you get home and you think about it and then you're like, oh shit, I didn't ask that. Like, what does that mean? You know, I'm like, so jump on your phone and send me a message and I'll answer that one for you. Like, whatever comes up, you know, because it's not till you get home or you're talking to your partner and your partner goes, oh, did you ask this? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't even think of that, you know? You know, like having that time and space to be able, and, you know, we are in the caveat of labor and birth, that sometimes that doesn't happen. But majority of the time, you know, there is time for those conversations to be had.
Yeah. And do you have with your clients, oh, you probably hear my little one in the background there for
Yeah.
anyone listening. He's asleep in my arms. Do you with your clients, I'm going to assume that you do, but you have like a consult with them, an appointment with them in their pregnancy where you talk about the birth and talk about different options and go through all of that. Like I know I had that with my midwives.
Yeah, so birth plan meeting. So that does differ on what the woman is choosing to have as a birth, whether, I should say location. So whether she's private, public, free birth, home birth, that conversation varies depending on where. Also varies depending whether the mum is a first-time mum or, had 2 babies, 3 babies. Also varies if there's, I've supported women with twins, women who are VBACs. There's a whole, it varies, but yes, we have that kind of birth plan meeting where we go through and, what do you envision your birth to be like? All of those things, what may happen, what may present. And we always kind of talk about plan A, plan B, plan C, we can't plan, but we can plan as much as we can. I'm a fan of birth plans. I find it really funny. I shouldn't say funny. I find it quite annoying when people say, just throw it out or it's pointless. It's not pointless. If it makes you, we plan everything. God, we plan holidays, we plan weddings, we plan houses, we plan buying cars. Like,
yeah.
We plan going to the shops, like, write a list to go to the shops. I always buy more than what's on the list. That doesn't go to plan.
Yep.
But I still do it,
Exactly. And it's not about thinking, I always think about it. It's not like you're making this plan and it's all going to go the exact way you think it's going to go, but it's about planning for those different scenarios and planning, well, if this happens, what then? If this happens, what are my choices? Because when you're in labor or you're in that moment, it is very hard to make those decisions. When you're thinking about, the next contraction that's coming on, the last thing you want to be thinking about is, what's that choice that I need to make? Give me all the information now. You want that prior to.
And it's even really important for the birth partners, know, like, and it's not about just the things that are on offer for birth. It's about, okay, I envision my birth as quiet. I don't want people talking. I don't want people whispering around me. I want the lights off. I want this particular playlist, I want massage, or, I want water. I want you to make sure I'm hydrated and nourished. Like for a birth partners to then go in and go, all right, my priorities are that the lights are out, it's quiet, the music's on for this particular playlist. She wants me to make sure I've got hydrated and nourished. Like it's all those, and those things impact birth. If you're not hydrated enough, it impacts your birth. If people are around you and annoying you, it impacts your birth. So it's not just, okay, I want, delayed cord clamping and those things. It's also about all of those things as well. And it opens up the conversation between you and your partner on, these are my expectations of what I want from you in the birth. And if I see you on a phone, I'm going to punch you afterwards. Okay. Not punch you, but you'll be spoken to. It's so true. The time you're allowed on the phone is to change the song. That's it.
Yeah. And it's so true, because that birth space is so sacred and so beautiful, and having
impactful.
It really does.
Your birth.
Yeah, it really does. And also, even on the hydration thing, the last thing you remember when you're in labor is to keep yourself hydrated and to eat something. Like I had, when we had our home birth recently, my husband and my toddler were both there giving me water. I was in the pool and they were giving me sips of water. I didn't think about it. I didn't ask for it. They just handed me, a straw and had sips of water, and there were splashing water on my back, and it just, all of these things that made such a difference to the labor experience and to making me feel really supported and to having the things that I needed in labor. You're right. Like it's so much more and so much deeper than just those tests and things like that.
Yeah. And it's really, I think one of the big things that gets neglected in labor and birth is our nervous system. So our nervous system, it's on a constant loop of, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And even little things of like the the healthcare professionals coming in and not sitting down, like not becoming down to your level, like even that body language of standing over you, your nervous system can feel threatened with that, you know?
Yes.
And I recently had a client and she said to me, we were debriefing her previous birth, and she said, oh, they kept getting annoyed with me because they were trying to do vaginal exams and my legs kept closing. And she goes, but I couldn't stop it. And I said, you know, that's your nervous system keeping you safe. Yes. Like that's actually what we want our nervous system to do. Like your nervous system was not feeling safe with a stranger trying to put fingers internally in you.
Yes.
Like that is like that subconscious nervous system response is out of our control, and you absolutely did nothing wrong. And what was wrong was those people getting annoyed with you and not acknowledging that you are actually in a time where you didn't feel safe. So they should have stopped, they should have sat with you, and they should have waited or asked if you wanted someone else to do it that you actually felt more comfortable with until you were safe and felt comfortable in having that procedure done. You know, but she held so much guilt and shame over that. And I was like, but in any other scenario, we would want our nervous system to do that. If we had a stranger going towards our genitals, we would be closing our legs, you know?
Yeah. And do you want to talk about the connection between the nervous system, that feeling of safety, and how that can impact the hormones and the physiology of natural birth?
Yeah, it just stops. It's, you know, if you got your adrenaline, you're going to have adrenaline through labor. It's going to happen. It really peaks just around transition. You can feel like, oh, sorry if I swear, but fuck what is happening. A lot of women say they feel like they're going to die, which you're not going to die, but it's just a climax of all these hormones and pressure, and kind of like your brain's like, I just can't deal with all of this. So yeah, you will have adrenaline throughout your labor, but the main thing we want to have is oxytocin. Oxytocin is what helps our uterus contract, and when our uterus contracts, it opens our cervix and it pushes our baby out. So anything that promotes oxytocin for you, that's what you want. So that can vary. You know, I think the birth space has a lot of expectations layered and a lot of set ways that we have to birth. There is no right way to birth. What produces oxytocin for me would be completely different to what produces oxytocin for you or anybody. And protecting that birth space, the number one thing in that birth space is making sure that woman feels safe, and it's your nervous system feeling safe as well. And this is not a research thing, this is a personal belief thing, but I quite often think an epidural is utilized not because of the pain from labor, it's because our nervous system doesn't feel safe and it feels fear, or, you know, we're in a freeze fawn, you know, we're in that kind of adrenaline fear kind of state, and we actually have an epidural to control that, not actually the pain that is associated with labor. But with that, having an epidural does not turn your nervous system off. Your nervous system is still processing what is happening. It's still on alert. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So yes, you may not feel the vaginal exam, but your nervous system feels the vaginal exam.
Yeah, so interesting. And do you think that you know, that feeling of safety, that really, when it comes to, I guess, our birth choices, maybe where we do choose to birth, whether that be hospital or home or free birth or whatever that choice is, that really comes down to where we feel safest as well.
100%.
I feel like that would be so different for every woman.
It's not suitable for some people. If you don't feel safe at home, then you shouldn't be birthing at home.
Yeah.
You know, and I think sometimes that's a thing where some people, they don't feel safe in a hospital, but they also don't feel safe at home. But they're trying to pick the one of the better evils.
That was my struggle with my first pregnancy. It was, I don't feel safe in hospital, but I'm not quite sure about, you know, about the home birth. And then I chose the hospital birth. I chose to labor at home for as long as possible. Managed to make it to fully dilated at home before my midwife even got there, because I didn't
Yeah.
realize how far along I was.
Yeah.
And it was funny because when the moment that they got there and we realized that this was actually going to happen at home, because I was already there, it was this realization of, actually, I feel really safe here. I do actually feel really safe here. I've got my midwives here. I know they're there. They're medically trained. I want to touch on that too, because I think a lot of people may not even realize the level of training that you have, and when it comes to home birth, all of the resources and the things that you have available for home birth to make it safe. Because I think there is a bit of a misconception for people that don't know that home birth isn't safe because they don't have any of the, the medical equipment and things like that. Do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah. So one, I do a lot more study, not a lot more, but I do a lot of study to be a home birth midwife, and I have to do regular study every year to ensure to maintain that education for a home birth midwife. I pretty much come with a little hospital in a bag. So kind of everything that would be in the birth suite, I have in my bag. I can put catheters in if I need to. I can put cannulas in and give fluid. I have a whole range of medication that if there was bleeding afterwards, I pretty much have everything bar one medication that the hospital has. I carry all that with me. I carry oxygen with me. I have, like if you were nauseous, like I basically have, a whole range of things in my bag that if we need to use it. But quite often I throw it out because it expires, and I don't really use it because I don't need it at home birth. It's there if I need it, but very rarely do I actually utilize it and need it. Also with that, I think one of the biggest things is people quite often talk about what happens if something goes wrong. My first question is, what's going to go wrong? Like, let's dig into that deeper, because, it's a big statement of what happens if something goes wrong. Okay, so what is it that's going to go wrong? And, if there's a lot of women have a particular fear, okay, so let's talk that through, and I'll tell you what that's going to look like if that was to eventuate. This is, we need to look at that. And, because when we live in an assumption, we actually quite make it more fearful than what it is. So we talk through that, and we also talk about that I'm not anti-hospital. Like, if we need to go to hospital, we're going to go to hospital. Like, if everything's normal, we stay home. But if anything presents where we're like, this is not quite the norm, then we would have discussions and we would talk about presenting to hospital. And quite often, I talk about I've been home birth midwife three something years. I've only ever gone to the hospital once with lights and sirens. And that was actually because my client had quite high blood pressure, very high blood pressure. She was symptomatic from that blood pressure. I was home by myself with her. And the risk of having a high blood pressure like that is having a seizure, which I didn't have the medication on me to treat if she had a seizure. The other factor that came into that is that it was 6 o'clock in the morning and it was peak hour, and we had to get through that traffic. So that's literally the only time I've had a lights and siren trip to the hospital. We have utilized ambulances before, but it's not in the sense of we have to get there super urgent. It's more in the sense of that the ambulance is going to get you from this bed in your home to a birth suite. We're going to bypass the whole triage, logistics. The ambos have pain relief there, and quite often we're transferring when baby is, potentially could birth, sometimes we're not, but sometimes we are. Then, you're there instead of driving in a car and pulling up on the side of the road and having a baby. Also with that, I quite often talk to clients is that when I call the ambulance quite often, or call 000, quite often I get put through to a clinician. I actually bypass the people who answer the phone and who are actually not medically trained. I then get put through to a clinician who is medically trained, and we talk about the situation, and they basically say, yes, you're doing the right thing. We're going to alert the hospital, and, so there's a whole range of background stuff happening, that actually, so then when we present to hospital, they're 99% of the time they're ready for us and they're prepared, and, they know what's happening because all this back work is happening.
Yeah. And I want to sort of preface this by saying, and I don't know if you know the percentages, but majority of home births end in a home birth, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And
You're more likely first-time mums to transfer.
yeah.
Yeah. But more likely to have a home birth.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And I would say, so I've had now one unplanned home birth, one planned home birth, both required hospital transfers, unfortunately for me, which, you know, it just was what it was. We tried everything. But I would say from that experience, like neither of those transfers were an emergency situation. They were transferred well before, you know, it was, I think what people need to understand is that midwives are so incredibly trained in understanding natural physiological birth that when they know when a transfer needs to happen well before it is any sort of emergency or any sort of, urgent situation. It is really a transfer about safety for you and safety for the baby. And then the transfer happens and, that was been my experience as well.
100%. Like quite often, you know, there's writing on the wall, you know, and some people go, well, how do you know that? And I was like, well, I can't, you know, like that's years of experience, you know, like, and if you talk to any midwife and especially home birth midwives, that's just the lingo we use, you know, because there's things not adding up to, this is not how physiological birth goes, you know. There's things, there's just little signs you see. And when I do birth plan meetings with home birth clients, I talk a lot about how we're very sensory. You know, it'll look like I'm sitting on my ass, you know, and I talk about how that's really hard for me to actually sit on my ass and not interfere with your birth. Like it takes a lot of energy for me to just constantly be like, she's fine, she doesn't need you, she's fine, you know. I'm watching so much, and I'm watching the language she uses, the words she says, how she moves her body, what kind of breathing noises she makes, what noises she makes, you know, what her body is looking like, if there's lumps and bumps and discharge. These are all things we're taking in. So this is what shows me birth is normal. But when those things don't present, I'm like, why is that not happening? Why is that lump not there that I normally see? Why is that discharge not coming out that I normally see? You know, so then you start questioning, okay, am I missing something? Is something happening that's, you know, is there something impacting this birth, or am I just being impatient and we're actually not further along as what I thought? You know, so you're constantly, yes, I'm sitting there on my ass looking like I'm doing nothing, but this is what my brain is doing. This is what we're analyzing and taking in. And yeah, so a lot of that work is done. It looks like I'm doing nothing. And I actually had a birth plan meeting today, and I said to him, that's actually what you want me to do. You want me to be sitting there doing nothing? Because I said, if I step up and I'm needed, that actually means something's happening, as, you know, something's deviated somewhere, you know. But also just touching back on your other point that, you know, yes, there's writing on the wall, and yes, we can see things, and quite often we're transferring before, you know, like we're transferring well ahead of time. Quite often it's the women.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Women, we totally undervalue ourselves in this society as women, and we put our power into a lot of other people, and people put their power into me. Well, I don't want it. It's your power. You have it, and you're capable. You are fine. And if there's something not right in your birth, you will tell me. And quite often they do. And I 100% will follow a woman's intuition. If she's telling me something doesn't feel right and I need to go to hospital, all right, let's go. Like something, you know, and quite often they're like, clinically for me, I'm like, oh, okay. But they are right. There is something, whether that's a feeling of safety, you know, where they thought they would feel safe at home, but when it's actually happening, they don't feel safe, you know. But women are really intuitive, and women they just know, like,
I was actually going to say that. I was going to say, women we are intuitive, and I think we do know. And really, the hardest part about that though is learning to trust your intuition and learning to be able to read it and understand it. Because even when I look back on my first birth, in hindsight, I distinctly remember this contraction that I had, and I'll share this because in my first birth, my baby at the start was in a really great position, you know, optimal position, head down, everything was beautiful. I distinctly remember this contraction during during labor, during pushing. And I didn't realize at the time, but looking back at it, I think that's because he ended up turning posterior and was trying to come through with his head deflects. He was, face forward presenting, and that's why I ended up transferring and found that out. But yeah, it's funny because I had this intuitive knowing that something wasn't quite right in that contraction. Something felt not quite. I don't know. I could feel the change, but I just didn't really know how to trust that. But it's really interesting that we do have that intuition, and we know when, something's not quite right.
Yeah. And this is, I actually have a coaching program that I do, like it's a 13-week online coaching program. And I also do a 1-day workshop where we talk a lot about this, that, as women, like our beliefs in ourselves and our beliefs in birth, but also about handing our power away. We are really good as women in this society to hand our power away. And that's what I was talking about. The amount of times, like, I know it's social media, but I swear I want to throw my phone when I'm on TikTok, because the amount of women who are like, it was the dates, it was the raspberry leaf tea, it was this. And I'm like, no, like, you fucking did it. Do you really think 6 dates a day made your body do all of that and you had nothing to do with it? Like, give our power to friggin' raspberry leaf tea and dates. Yes. We will not claim anything for ourselves and be like, I fucking did that. Yeah. I grew a baby and I birthed a baby and now I'm feeding a baby and I did all of that. Like,
I love that so much
away.
I really love that. I really think that is such a really important message that you've just shared about really just leaning into your intuition, leaning into your power, and really owning that, because you're right, when it comes to pregnancy, when it comes to birth, and when it comes to women's healthcare in general, we do hand our power over, and it's really time, I think. So it's like, I really feel like it's time to get that knowledge out there for women to reclaim that power and to know how powerful we are.
And I think there's just so much consumerism that we're not equipped. Like, we have to do the mile circuit. We have, like, I'm pro body work and all of those things, but why are you doing body work? Are you doing body work because your body's sore and you want to feel better? Or are you doing body work because someone told you can't birth a baby if you don't do body work every week? Like, why are you doing the body work? Like, also too, like, people go, I'm getting close to due. I have to do the stretch and sweeps and I have to go and have your acupuncture and the acupressure. Well, your nervous system is not dumb. Your nervous system is going to know whether you're going to that acupuncture with an expectation that this acupuncture is going to put you into labor. You ain't going to go into labor if you've got an expectation that this acupuncture is going to put you into labor. Because when you have an expectation, you have adrenaline and your nervous system is on alert. Oh my God, that is not oxytocin and it's not going to put you into labor. And no matter what you do, it's not like it's just coincidence. There's so many things happening inside your body. Like, there's so many minute microscopic details that need to happen before your body and baby are ready to get the show going. And quite often the show is on the road before we are even cognitively aware that the show is on the road. And we are out here with our times and our expectations and our deadlines, and our body and baby are in there going, what are you talking about? 42 weeks. I ain't got it. What's 42 weeks? What deadline are you on?
Yes. Yep. It's when the body and the baby's ready, right?
Yeah. And we're out here going, nothing's happening. There's so much happening inside you can't get to step D without doing step A, B, and C. And quite often we don't feel step A and B. It's happening. Our body's doing it. Our baby's doing it, but we're out here going, nothing's happening. And we just judge it. We judge our body and we judge our baby. But they are friggin' smart. We think that, and I'm saying this to clients now. I'm like, I'm not smarter than your body and baby. I'm not. They run the show. Like, and that's me continually questioning my bias, my assumptions, all of those things. And, I'm not smarter than this baby that's coming out. This baby has, like, they are so smart. And for babies to come out through pelvises and for women to do that, we are just smart and we are amazing. And I just will not understand why we continue to question mum and babies. It blows my mind.
I think that's a perfect way to finish this conversation. Like, it's just, that was just everything. Any final words or any words of wisdom that you want to give women who, are pregnant or, in this phase of life?
Engage with a private midwife. It does not matter where you're birthing. It does not matter where you live in Australia. If you lived, I don't know, in the middle of the Nullarbor, you can still access a private midwife. All private midwives in Australia can see anybody within Australia via telehealth and via phone. All my services via telehealth and phone and within my clinics in Melbourne are all bulk billed. And currently at the moment, you do need a GP referral to see a private midwife, but as of November, that collaborative agreement is going. So utilize private midwives. If your questions are not being answered, and you're walking away scared, fearful, confused, get on the phone to a private midwife and say, can I have 15 minutes of your time? And from November, if you have a Medicare card, those midwives can bulk bill you and they can be paid for their time. And I can guarantee you most private midwives, I know I am, I'm happy to answer any phone call if this is what's happening for me. I can't give medical advice completely, but I can definitely sit down and have a chat with you and talk about options and talk about how you can advocate for yourself within wherever you're birthing to have conversations that you are warranted and deserve. And just always remember, you are a tax-paying citizen of this country and you're entitled to healthcare however you deem necessary.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Can you also share with us where we can find you, Kate? Like on socials and things?
So my business name is Grow.Birth.Mother. So my website is www.grow.birth.mother.com. I'm also on Instagram as grow.birth.mother and TikTok as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
And feel free to call or email. Always open.
Love that. And I'll share the links in the show notes as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Tris Alexandra Nutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.